We are live.
All right, welcome everybody to the fourth episode of Sharks Talk 916. Presenting today is me, Chad, and with me as always is Nolan. We have a special guest today, Jumbo Joe Thornton, missing a chunk of his beard. It looks like Nolan got his new bobblehead yesterday, so he's ready to go. I don't have a lot of questions. Yeah, he's ready to scrap. Fighting Joe Thornton is what we're going to call him.
Beard missing there.
Oh yeah, the little
chunk
piece
of his beard.
The famous beard pulling incident. So today we're going to talk about a few things. First off, this is Sharks Talk 916, where we talk about the Sharks. We're brought to you by Sports Talk 916, which if you're interested in sports other than hockey, which I don't know why you would be, but let's say you're not me, and you like other sports, then you can check out Sharks Talk 916. They're on Facebook. Sports Talk 916 on Facebook, or sportstalk916.com is the website. They are nice enough to let us use their feed to do our show, so be nice to them. And sometimes they're funny. I listen to them, not because I have to. So we are trying a schedule every couple of weeks, and this is, I think, the first time we've successfully done 2 weeks in a row. Is that right?
But it probably won't be staying that way because I'm moving to Nashville here in the next couple of weeks. So my schedule's crazy, so we'll let you guys know when the next show will be once we figure that out. So
yeah, so it's Sharks Talk 916 / whatever the area code for Nashville is going to be.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'll find out eventually.
But we should still be able to pick up every 2 weeks once Nolan gets moved. And as you can tell, I have to give a shout out to my wife before we go any further, because otherwise I'll get in trouble. I have some decorations up now. I came home the other day and my wife had decorated some, so she felt bad for you all having to stare at just boxes last episode.
And I feel like since you're wearing I'm assuming you're wearing your Vlasic jersey, right?
Yeah.
And then I got Carlson, so we have to be arch enemies today because they just don't get along. So
they just don't. I thought about wearing my McGinnis jersey just so I could cry about the fact that Ginners isn't with us. But I decided I'll go with Vlasic since he's still playing. All right, so today we're going to talk about a number of things. So let's kind of jump in. I didn't get to watch the game yesterday. I unfortunately was remodeling a condo. So Nolan, let's talk in general just about kind of the games that we had in the homestand. I feel like it was a pretty uplifting homestand, in my opinion, especially with two of our big guys out, and we still managed to win 4. What are your takeaways? Well,
I think you said the key words, managed to win 4. I didn't think we played all that well in any of the games up until yesterday. Yesterday, I thought they played pretty well. Fortunately for them, they were playing some lesser opponents. I mean, Colorado, they're a fringe playoff team right now. They're outside of the last wild card spot, I believe. I think we're fighting for the last wild card spot with Dallas and Arizona and Minnesota. And then Chicago, not very good. Montreal's, I think, holding down the last spot in the Eastern Conference. And then St. Louis is holding down the third spot in their division in the West. But, the key things they were missing, both Kane and Carlson, which I think you touched on. So it was just kind of a grinded out, not to mention the flu bug has swept through the team. Burns and Pavelski were hit particularly hard with that. There was a number of unnamed guys that are fighting various symptoms as well. So, I mean, little expectation on the homestand, I think, in terms of the challenges the team was facing, but the opponents they played helped out. I guess we'll talk about yesterday's game a little bit since that was the most recent game. It's a very good game overall. Probably the biggest positive for the Sharks is Timo Meier getting back on track. He's now scored, I think, in 4 straight games, including a couple of nice goals yesterday. Thornton set him up beautifully on the power play in the first period. And then a beautiful play at the end of the first period between Hertl, Couture, and Meier. They kind of reunited that line for one shift, and sure enough, they scored in the one shift together. I saw someone on Twitter comment how the Sharks are so good that they managed to get a goal with entirely backhands because literally Hertl backhanded it down the boards to Logan, and then Logan fired it backhand to the front of the net. Meier gets it, pulls it to his backhand, and taps it home. So the all backhand goal.
I feel like one of the goals wasn't one of the goals against the Habs that way too? I thought it was a backhand pass and a backhand goal. Yeah.
And then the third period, the Sharks dominated. They couldn't get one by Jake Allen of St. Louis. Nyquist hit the post with about a minute left, which would have been an awesome goal for him to score to win a game to kind of jumpstart his Sharks career. But they pulled that out in overtime. Couture had a beautiful saucer feed over the St. Louis defenseman, and LeBanc punched it home to put the Sharks into first place.
Yeah, LeBanc got an even-handed goal. I was shocked.
Yeah, he's. We'll get to LeBanc in a second, but he's very good in overtime and more time and space, just like the power play suits him well. So he's a good overtime player.
And I think one of the themes, we actually got I noticed this from Brody as well, but the 2 or fewer, right? So the last 3 games we held the opponents to 2 or fewer goals. And the Sharks are 29-0 this season when doing that. Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what I've talked about on the show and on the blog and on Facebook and Twitter. And basically anytime someone will listen, or even if no one's listening, like defense needs to be the number one thing that the Sharks focus on. That needs to be where their game originates. They'll score the goals. We know that. I mean, it was 5-2 Chicago, 5-2 against the Canadiens, right? And St. Louis is a tough team. 3-2 because some really good goaltending. But I don't think goals is ever going to be a problem for us. I think the problem for us is always going to be defense, and that's where everyone needs to kind of start. So they kind of showed that this home stretch.
Yeah, and there were some positive signs, especially the last 2 games. Against Montreal, honestly, the team was terrible for the first 2 periods, and Jones sort of bailed them out. I think that was the most saves he's had in a game in quite a while. It's probably his best game in the last couple of weeks. Yesterday, he only faced, I think, 19 shots, so it wasn't a ton of shots, but he still made some very important saves. So I'm not confident Jones is back to being the goalie he was even 2 years ago, but any positive signs with Jones is an important thing at this point, obviously, as they head into the playoffs.
And he always steps it up in the playoffs. So, I mean, if he's doing better now and then he manages to make his normal upgrade during playoffs, then I'm not as worried as I was 2 weeks ago when, Jones is letting things go through left and right.
Yeah. And I thought it was kind of funny. I know you missed the game yesterday, but the first goal St. Louis scored on the power play, it was the guy shot it at the net. He missed the net. It bounces off the glass right back to the net. And the guy pounds it in, before Jones even has a chance to react. And I saw Gackle on Twitter saying, "Oh man, another soft goal on Jones." I'm like, don't get me wrong. I look for every opportunity to bash Jones myself, but come on, dude. It bounced off the glass right in front of the net. There's nothing he can do about it.
Yeah, we are not necessarily Jones cheerleaders, right? No. But, I mean, when you take a bounce like that, he's got to play the shot that's coming from the line. And when it gets past him, he needs time to react. I saw that comment. I saw your post. I kind of looked at the goal, and I agree with you. I think that it's a little harsh to get on Jones about that. What I thought was funny, though, is the opposite, where people are like, "Oh," I saw the opposite on Twitter, which is like, "Oh, Brody was right all along about Jones." I'm like, okay, let's calm down. Like, Jones hasn't been great all season. Let's not pretend he has. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
Trigger happy. I mean, every goal is, "Oh my God, Jones sucks," or he makes one big save. "Oh, Jones is back." It's like so dramatic one way or the other.
Yeah.
So the other big topic we kind of want to go over in terms of this last little stretch, obviously the Sharks swept their homestand. They're now in first in the Pacific Division by a whole 1 point. Calgary hosts Vegas later today, so that may last the whole 10 hours or so. But we'll see. Calgary's dropped 4 in a row, including a game in Vegas. We'll see if they can pay back Vegas today in Calgary. So the 4 in a homestand, not only are they first in the Pacific, but also first in the Western Conference, which the Sharks and Flames are about, I think, 4 or 5 points clear of Winnipeg, and the Nashville's a couple of points further back. So barring a rough finish for Calgary or San Jose, it looks like the Western Conference is going to come down to those 2 teams. And we'll talk about the importance of that later. The other theme we wanted to talk about this homestand, I thought that really stood out, especially the last couple of games, is just the Sharks' third line, LeBanc, Sorensen, and Thornton. Have really started to take over. I'm going to let you jump in, Chad.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the third line kind of like you talk about the second line sometimes. To me, the third line is Thornton and Sorensen. and then there's another guy that plays on the third line. I think lately LeBlanc has definitely been better, but he still has issues when playing on the defensive end of the ice, right? He still has trouble when he needs to make the defensive play as opposed to making an offensive play. I don't think anyone ever argued, including myself, that he wasn't an offensive player. Like he's great on offense, but he's looking better. Sorensen is looking amazing since coming back from injury. He's been phenomenal, and I think that Thornton and Sorensen playing together is a big part of it. Thornton says he loves it. Sorensen says he loves it. It's a great example of how Thornton can help develop, a new player or a young player or however you want to say it. But he can make players better just by being on a line with them.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to call out just as a kind of an admiration of Joe Thornton, just how much of a leader he is. And Sorensen, I think, is the greatest example. I mean, hell, you even go back to the first year that Thornton joined the Sharks. I mean, Chichu was already a good player, but, setting up 56 goals for Chichu, wins the Rocket Richard Trophy. And there's so many guys over the years that Joe Thornton has helped mold into much better players than they probably are. Sorensen, I think, has a lot of skill, but there's no doubt those two have bonded, and it's almost like a father-son relationship in some ways. Joe's probably old enough to be his dad to an extent. But, I mean, as you look ahead to the playoffs and you look at the playoffs team, I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to find another playoff team other than maybe Toronto who has a third-line center the quality of Joe Thornton. Is he Joe Thornton of 5 years ago? No, of course not, but he's looking healthier and healthier every day. He's racking up points the last week, and that's going to be a huge mismatch for the Sharks as they move forward for teams to match up against Hurdle, Couture, and Thornton down the middle is not easy to do whatsoever.
Agree. And I think that we talked about that some for trade deadline stuff, right? Like that, I mean, your first, second, and third centers are great. There's some question, which we'll get into when we talk about lines, but there's some question about, okay, who's your fourth line center, and are any of them actually centers, or should any of them be centers? But I think having three lines led by great centers and with good wingers, we have three really strong scoring lines. So I can't complain about that. I think there's some question as to who plays with them, but I wouldn't separate Sorensen and Thornton any more than I'd separate Kane and Hurdle. Like that would just be crazy to me to do that.
Yeah. So there's one other point I want to go over about the homestand before we get to the forward lines, and we'll go into kind of our opinions on what the forward line should look like once Kane gets back healthy here. And that is something that's kind of snuck under the radar, except for a few classic fanboys and fangirls that we won't name. But if you look at the last couple of games in the time on ice sheet, Brendan Dillon is now getting a few minutes more than Vlasic every night. Mm-hmm. Now, you could argue this is because Vlasic is paired with Heed currently, and obviously they're going to shelter Heed's minutes compared to the other guys, so that's part of it. But Chad and I think it's purely merit, too, that, Dillon leads the team in plus-minus. He's been probably their most steady defenseman the entire season in terms of keeping pucks out of the net.
And I think, honestly, blaming Heed for the lack of ice time would be stupid. I mean, Heed's been playing great. I've been very impressed with Heed's skill out there. He had an assist yesterday, right? I keep wanting to say last night, but it was during the day. And didn't he have two the game before that, or a couple games before? I mean, he's been racking up points. He's playing good defense. He's not making mistakes that lead to goals. I think it's because Vlasic isn't, just like Joe isn't Jumbo wasn't the Jumbo 5 years ago. I mean, Vlasic isn't even the Vlasic of 2 years ago right now.
Yeah.
And Dillon is a Dillon we've never seen before.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think he earned it. He earns more ice time, and until he screws up, I don't think that changes.
And Dillon, I mean, he gets better every single year. I mean, when he first got to the Sharks, I was not a fan of Brendan Dillon. He was way too slow. He couldn't move his legs. Everyone knows he can't shoot a puck with his life dependent on it. And every shot he takes gets blocked, and he's gotten progressively better every single year. And the leap that he's taken this year, I think, is far beyond any of the other seasons he's had.
Yeah. I remember Dylan Pollock. Do you remember that pairing?
Oh, God, don't remind me of that disaster.
We wanted to trade the whole pairing. We're just like, get rid of both of them if anyone will take them.
Slowest deep pairing in the NHL.
So terrible. But I think Carlson's made Dylan better. I think maybe Carlson just gave Dylan confidence. Playing with him made him realize how he could play. Because even with Carlson out, Dylan's still playing great.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, the Sharks' shutdown pair for years was Vlasic and Braun, right? And they started to start the year. Obviously, Vlasic was with Carlson, and then Braun was with Dylan, which is the way that it is now. We'll see if that stays the same when Carlson comes back. But Vlasic and Braun were always the shutdown pair, and the last few games he's basically playing Braun and Dylan as the new shutdown pair. Which, I mean, if I was not a big Vlasic and Braun were very good 2 years ago together, but the last year or so, especially this year, they have not been much of a shutdown pair at all. So we'll see what happens when Carlson gets back, assuming he gets back, which we'll talk about in a second. So I see a Vegas fan has joined us to talk some trash. We'll get to the last thing we're going to go over today is kind of playoff preview, and Vegas is definitely a conversation point as far as the playoffs go, but we'll make you wait till the end of the show. All right.
That's how we keep viewers. We don't answer the things you want to talk about till the end of the show.
Right. Yes. Follow our program. So next topic we want to talk about is obviously Evander Kane is out right now. And since our last show was literally a day before the trade deadline. Chad geniusly predicted the Sharks would get Nyquist, or at least hoped for it. And sure enough, it happened. So now you essentially have 10 top 9 forwards once Kane gets back. I think Chad and I mainly agree that they're going to keep the top 3 line centers the same: Hurdle, Couture, and Thornton. Everybody says Couture's line is the first line. I think Hurdle line is the first line now, but it doesn't really matter. So let's assume that Hurdle, Couture, and Thornton stay down the middle. Who do you think joins each of those guys on the wings as they put together the top 9?
So I have 2. We'll go over my first one, and then I have kind of a crazy things I would do to mix it up one. But so
sure.
My main one, I think Couture, you keep Pavs and Timo. That line is really gelling, and I wouldn't mess with it. I'm going to do what I didn't think I would do. I'm going to remove Donskoy from the second line, or what we call the first line. I'm going to go Kane, Hurdle, Nyquist. And not because of Donskoy, but because Nyquist likes to pass too much.
Yeah.
And you can't have him and Jumbo passing the puck back and forth. And
I hate Nyquist with Thornton because he's more of a playmaker than a shooter. I mean, he shoots more than Joe, but you're right. Those two, they just pass back to each other. In fact, they had a few breakaways where they did exactly that.
Yeah. He's not expecting Jumbo to pass every time, and Jumbo's not expecting him to pass. And so it just becomes, it doesn't work out. And then, so I think then Jumbo, you keep Sorensen. I wouldn't break them up. And I would put Donskoy in that third line because I like Donskoy's defensive play better than I like LeBank's defensive play. Yeah. And then I have for the fourth line, honestly, I guess you keep Goodrow at center because you don't have somebody else to play center.
I mean, Haley can technically play center, but don't get me started on that. So
okay, but we're talking playoff. We're talking playoff lines, right? So Haley's not even in the.
I'm starting to wonder at this point because he's played every game. I was very sure of that when he got added. They would never play him in the playoffs, but I'm not so sure now. So we'll see.
He's got 2 or 3 assists, doesn't he, since he came on?
Yeah, he had one game where he was effective.
Yeah. So I've got Goodrow center. I actually bring Radil back to replace Haley.
And that would take Melker out of the lineup if you leave LeBanc in.
So that's the question. So I wouldn't leave LeBanc in.
And you're going to take LeBanc out of the lineup.
So
oh man,
I know. It's never going to happen.
No, he's too good on the power play.
He's too good on the power play. But we've had how many power plays in the last 3 games?
Yeah. He scored on the power play yesterday, although it was the second unit, not his unit.
So we've had 2 power plays in 3 games.
Yeah, I mean,
you keep him there. Yeah. You keep him there as a defensive hazard to hopefully get, him
I think
on
he's
power
been
play.
Better defensively the last couple of weeks. I mean, he did have the one terrible drop pass. I don't remember who that was against a few games ago that led to a goal. I think it was against Montreal, if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah, that's right. I mean, I've got them interchanged. I've got Carlson and then LeBanc, one of those two. I think that's the tough part, right, is that fourth line, honestly, to me, well, I guess you're going to probably argue LeBanc and Donskoy, but I think that fourth line is the hardest one to fill.
Yeah. So as far as the top three lines, your alignment is kind of my second choice, and I think that's probably what DeBoer will go with because that seems to be the vision he likes right now. But what I would do, so if we look at the Couture line, I would have Pavelski and Nyquist. At the end of the third period, not the St. Louis game, but the game before that against Montreal, they put Nyquist with Pavelski and Couture, and Nyquist looked the best he had since joining the Sharks. So I like that three together: Couture, Nyquist, and Pavelski. And then I would absolutely love this line. This line would be fucking dominant, in my opinion. Hertl, Meyer, and Kane together would just be sick, in my opinion. I love how Hertl and Meyer play together. You'll notice when Meyer moved off Hertl's line, he went cold for 20 games.
Yeah.
He's gotten back to scoring now without Hertl, but those two together, I think, are just dominant. So they're both power forwards, and Kane's a power forward too. It's probably loading up one line too much, but I would love to see how it would work, at least for a couple games, to see those three guys together, because to me, those are our three best forwards on the team.
I think, I would agree that my worry would be you don't have anyone heavy anywhere else, right? So you've got to, again, what we call first line. You've got a first line that can bruise and be in there with anybody, right? But then everybody else is a little weaker because of it. Because I love Pavs and Couture, but they're just not a big guy like Timo is, right?
Yeah.
And then what would you do second line?
So third line would be the way it is now: Thornton, Sorensen, and LeBanc, and then I would drop Donskoy to the fourth line. If you look at the last 20 games, I don't think he's scored a goal. He's had some assists, but as you and I have talked about privately, I feel like Donskoy is just along for the ride with Kane and Hertl, and he just largely gets assists because he's playing on that line. Donskoy is great with puck possession, and he's got pretty decent vision in passing, but his shot is probably one of the weaker shots of the Sharks forward groups. And when he's not confident, he's just not effective. And if you remember a couple months ago when he was struggling, they dropped him to the fourth line and it woke him up. So maybe it does that again, and then you can move him back up. And if LeBanc or Sorensen struggle, then I would drop those guys down to the fourth line, one of them.
As long as you're not talking about – so what's your fourth line is still Goodrow and Carlson?
Yeah, Goodrow, Carlson, and Donskoy. I wouldn't put Haley in. And I do like Radil, but as much as some Sharks fans hate Nelker, he is a very good penalty killer, and DeBoer loves him. Sure. So he's not going to leave the lineup whether we want him to or not. It's just not going to happen, barring injury. So
I don't actually have a problem with Nelker. So
he's played much better the last couple of months ever since Gackel wrote the article basically telling him that the fans hate him. So,
and I would say the one thing about Donskoy, why I don't think moving into a fourth line is a big deal, is because he's still going to work hard. He's still going to be the back checker. He's still going to do all the things he does that aren't scoring, even on a fourth line. And maybe if he has something to prove, he'll do it a little better as well.
And that's why I don't like LeBanc on the fourth line. He's too offensively gifted, and his skill sets are wasted on the fourth line. Sure, you can still play him on the power play, but he's a liability as far as the fourth line. Whereas on the third line, I feel like Jumbo can sort of clean up some of his messes. Whereas the fourth line, he's playing with guys that aren't that skilled, to be honest.
Jumbo's been back checking like he's 20 years old. So
yeah, he has. He looks fantastic. So that's kind of the lines we would go with. I think the biggest question really is who goes to the fourth line. The rest of it probably doesn't matter as much in terms of how the top three lines shake out amongst the 9 guys that they choose for the top 9, and they may rotate, but I think the biggest interesting thing will be whether LeBanc, Sorensen, or Donskoy go to the fourth line. It's going to be one of those guys. They're not going to put, Pavelski, Meyer, Kane, Nyquist on the fourth line, obviously. So,
and then I have a crazy idea. So here's my crazy idea. It doesn't just affect forwards; it's also defensemen. So I think Timo, Couture, Pavs, like I had before, Hertl, Donskoy, Kane. I think you play Nyquist at center on the third line. So with LeBanc and Sorensen.
From my understanding, go ahead.
Well, LeBanc, either with LeBanc and Sorensen or LeBanc and Carlson. You try him in the third line center position. You jump Jumbo down to fourth line center, or vice versa. Maybe you ask Nyquist to play fourth line center. But I think you try Nyquist out at center.
When we did our trade deadline show. I was under the impression Nyquist could play center, but after looking at it when we got him, he's exclusively a winger from what I've seen.
Which is funny because we put him on the roster as a center.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine.
Maybe he's played there a little bit, but I think when I looked, hasn't even taken like more than 20 faceoffs this year.
But I think, well, and maybe that's the problem, right? Is can he win faceoffs? I think style of play, I think he can play center. He reminds me a lot of Jumbo in the way that he plays the puck. So the question would be
the only issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So if he can take draws, if he can win faceoffs, I would say give him a shot. I mean, I'd rather have 4 good centers than Goodrow's just not great. I mean, he's just
no. He was much better last year than he has been this year. And then again, it's a 4th line center. How much are you expecting? But no, that he's definitely been a disappointment this year. I mean, they gave him a 2-year extension before the season started, and if you ask Doug Wilson right now if he would give that extension, I don't think he would.
Yeah. So, and then the other, I guess, controversial thing I would keep Vlasic with Heed.
And take Braun out of the lineup. As you know, that's not going to happen.
It's not going to, but I mean,
I think that could be our lineup next year for sure, because I think Braun is getting traded in the offseason. But
here's the thing: you've got 14 games left.
Yeah.
If Kane and Carlson are back before the playoffs, I think you can play with some of these and see what happens. I mean, I know the problem is points are important right now, right? We want home ice, which we'll talk about a little bit when we talk about looking ahead. But I think if it becomes clear that either A, we've got it secured, or B, we're not going to get it, I think maybe you throw some stuff out there and see how it works. I don't know. Braun's great. He's just not great anymore, or in the modern game, he doesn't.
I would say he's an average to slightly above average defender at this point. He's completely worthless offensively.
And that's the thing. He's generating offense now, and that's something that Vlasic Braun never does, right? Like,
right.
That
I guess the counter to that would be: do you really need Heed's offense if you have Burns and Carlson? Assuming Carlson comes back relatively healthy. But yeah, it's barring injury, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, they're not going to sit Braun. Their view of Braun, I think, is much different than our view and some of the fans' view. But I do think next year that's a definite possibility, depending on what happens with Carlson and Vlasic and all the questions there. All right, so our last sort of segment here, it's going to be a lengthy segment because there's a lot to go over, but we just kind of want to look ahead to mainly the playoffs, but also the next little while here in terms of playoff positioning, because I think it's going to be critical moving forward. But the first question we had was, can the Sharks hold on to the division lead? They're 1 point ahead. They played the same amount of games of Calgary. They'll play one less once Calgary plays later tonight against Vegas. But do you think the Sharks can hold on and win the division?
I think yes. And part of the reason is because we play Calgary still, which I think if we stay
one game in San Jose,
if we stay within one game of them, I think that's the deciding game is when we play them. I know you're kind of worried about Minnesota Winnipeg. I'm not. The back-to-back that scares me is Vegas Calgary.
And that one's at home, though, at least, I believe. It's not on the road.
But which one do you play Dell in?
As far as this week or that back-to-back? Honestly, I think Jones probably plays both of those, depending on how much they rest him between now and then. But that back-to-back, I think, also depends on the playoff race. If they've gotten some separation from Calgary or they've fallen quite a bit back, then I can see Dell playing one of them. But otherwise, I think Jones plays both. If they do split it up, then I think Dell will play against Vegas and Jones will play versus Calgary.
Yeah, so the upcoming back-to-back, Minnesota Winnipeg, I think you do Dell than Jones, to me.
Yep. I think so as well. Minnesota's the lesser opponent. They're still a good team. And I've always kind of fought this question in my head, like, okay, do you play your starting goalie against the worst team to try and guarantee a win? And then, okay, on a back-to-back, you're not likely to win anyway, so just play your backup. If you win, it's kind of gravy. But I think you play your best goalie against the best team, which would be Jones against Winnipeg.
Yeah, I think at this point, especially with the points the way they are, you give yourself the best chance at winning both games. I mean, you have to.
You don't want to just surrender the second game. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And they won in Winnipeg 2 weeks ago. I mean, it wasn't on a back-to-back, but they can certainly win there as they showed last time.
So Kane's not making the trip.
He's not making the trip. Did they announce that this morning? Or
yeah, I think Gacko had it that they said Kane wasn't making the trip.
wow, I'm surprised. I expected he would be back any day now.
And then Karlsson, I don't think there wasn't a.
So Karlsson, the update they had last practice before the St. Louis game, you kind of got different stories from
Karlsson and the coach.
DeBoer and Karlsson. Karlsson basically said, I'll be 100% for the playoffs. If I get a game or two in before the playoffs, great. That's the goal. If I don't, I don't. So he's basically saying, I ain't coming back to the last 2 or 3 games at the earliest. As far as DeBoer saying, oh, yeah, I think he's going to be back much sooner than that. I personally, without even hearing those comments, kind of figured what Karlsson said would be the case, that he would play, the last 2 or 3 games if possible, just to give him some sort of action, and he's not completely cold going into the playoffs where the pace just picks up even more. But yeah, I think he'll try to get in 1 or 2 games, hopefully 3 if his groin is well enough to risk it.
Yeah, and the Kane thing kind of bothers me because it's shaping up like Karlsson, right? Where how long are we going to be? Because he's day to day now, but he's not making the trip. So how long are we
speculating on Twitter? Is it a concussion from the Char hit? DeBoer said it was a middle body injury, and Kane said himself it wasn't related to that hit. But it seemed like, he was practicing with the team, and it looked like he was about to return, and now suddenly he's not returning. He also missed the team photo, which, that tells me concussion because the lighting and some of the other impacts. What other injury would cause you to miss the team photo? Like, that just seems strange to me.
Yeah, I can't
even begin to speculate beyond some sort of concussion or vertigo type thing that, would make the lighting a challenge. But who knows?
So I don't actually think either one of them will be back for this back-to-back. I think in reality,
Karlsson definitely not. Yeah.
I think in reality, Florida is the first time you see. Maybe I read it wrong. I can't find it now, but I could have sworn it said Kane wasn't making the trip. So, but I think Florida's the first time you see one of them, and that's fine because it's a home game. If they don't make the trip, they get to basically stay home, rest, skate, do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, I don't even think you'll see Karlsson practice until I think he's sitting at least 2 more weeks before he even jumps on the practice ice. Personally, I want to talk about that for a second. Did you watch the Boston game when he re-injured himself? I was fucking livid watching that shit happen. So, first of all, he shouldn't have been in the lineup. He misses 1 game against Detroit, and personally, I think he comes back to play because he wanted to be there for Nyquist's first game. He's good friends with Nyquist. They're both Swedes. He wanted to be out there and playing with his buddy, and just kind of forced it and rushed it. And it was a big game against Boston, who's second in the NHL right now. So that was one thing. Okay, fine. He plays and then clearly re-aggravates it, goes down in pain, can barely get to the bench. He goes in between periods. And the part that pisses me off, he comes back out after aggravating it. He gets smoked by Brad Marchand, who skates right around him for an easy goal. He looks like a grandma out there. He can barely fucking move. And they still leave him out there. And then he aggravates it again. And who knows how much damage that has done for the rest of this season.
And he came out and said exactly what I said to you, right? Is that the only way that he's out there is he's back there insisting to play.
Which I think is bullshit. At some point, you got to say, no, it's not worth it.
Yeah, you got to bench him. Because I think
you respect his opinion, but at some point, you got to say no. I'm sure they had to say no to Joe in the playoffs, 2 years ago when his knee was blown out.
And I talked about this a little bit in the blog I posted last week. I think that puts in some serious concerns about re-signing him. Until you know that he's going to be 100%, and not just for a game, right? But he's gonna go. He'd have to go to the playoffs without re-injuring it, or from when he comes back to the playoffs till the end, he's got to show no signs of re-injury. I think to consider paying him $11 to $13 million, which is what you're going to need to pay to keep him here.
I guess the argument to that would be he'll have all off season to heal and he'll put it behind him. But as you and I have talked about, groins and hamstrings and injuries like that can be chronic and can nag you the rest of your career. I hope that's not the case, obviously, but it is a risk. And if the Sharks don't take that risk, some team will throw a max contract at him. I mean, he's just too good of a player where some team that's desperate will do it. And if he's insistent on getting that, he will get it, whether it's from the Sharks or somebody else. But my bigger concern right now, I mean, we'll deal with that in the offseason. I mean, obviously it's the number one question going in the offseason, but right now the immediate concern is this team has a hell of a chance to win the Stanley Cup this year. Yeah. And his health is going to be a huge factor in that one way or the other. I think they can win without him, but it's going to make it a hell of a lot more difficult. And I personally am a big Karlsson fan. That's why I bought his jersey. So I'm a little bit biased, but I don't think he will make it through the playoffs healthy. I just don't see it happening. I don't think 4 weeks is enough time for that type of injury, especially the playoffs. I mean, you're going to be skating as hard as you've ever skated.
Yeah.
Both times he's come back, he's re-aggravated it. He re-aggravated it before the Detroit game, and then he re-aggravated it again against the Boston game. The longest he lasted since this injury was 2.5 games. And I just don't think – and they sat him out for basically 4 weeks the first time.
Yeah.
And I think the injury is worse now than it was to begin with because of the re-aggravations.
Yeah, they say it's a sprain. I don't think there's any way it's a sprain. I mean, having torn a muscle, like this is to me tear length of time that it's taking to heal up. One thing Steve Cooper asked is like maybe we can get a cropper. Sorry, maybe we can get a discount out of it. I think if he re-injures during the playoffs, I think we can get a discount out of it. I mean, I don't think that's because at that point, no one knows what's going on with him except for what the Sharks say.
Right, their medical staff, yeah. And I mean, teams will do physicals before they sign him, but still.
I hope not to see him before Chicago, which is the last few games.
I would honestly, let's say the Sharks win the division and they end up playing, Minnesota or Colorado or Dallas, I don't think they'd have a problem beating those teams without Karlsson. I would consider sitting him out the first round if it helps. I mean, that's another 2 weeks of rest in theory. I would consider the challenge, of course, then he's coming back in cold turkey into the second round against either Calgary or Vegas. But
maybe you just limit time. I mean, you bring him in, but you limit his time. When if you get ahead in games, you let him stay out and you play 5 defensemen or something.
I think it depends. I mean, obviously they know whether. I guess you could argue whether they know or not he's 100% because muscle injuries you never really know until you test it. That's what they've been saying. But if let's say it comes to playoff time and it's time for game 1 of the playoffs, then they're like, I don't know if he's ready, then I think you have to sit him. I don't think you risk it and lose him for the rest of the playoffs to rush him back into a first round you can probably handle without him, assuming they're not playing Vegas.
Yeah, agreed. I think if they get an easy wild card, easy. I mean, nothing in the Pacific is easy.
You never know. Playoffs, anything can happen, but much easier matchup in Vegas.
But I think maybe at least the first game, you say, well, let's see how we do without him, and then kind of go from there.
I mean, that's what they were doing with Jumbo 2 years ago when they got to the second round. It seemed like he was getting close to possibly coming back.
So
we got off track a little bit. Let's talk about Vegas since we just brought that up. How important? I mean, I think we just pretty much answered the question, but how important is it that they win the division so they don't have to play Vegas first round? Because if they don't win the division, they're playing Vegas the first round. There's zero question about that. Vegas is locked into the 3 seed, and Calgary or San Jose is pretty much locked into the 2 seed, unless it's possible Vegas could pass one of the teams because they've won 4 or 5 in a row, and Calgary's dropped 4 or 5 in a row, but I don't see that happening.
Incredibly important would be my answer to that question. And I'm not normally one to say that. Like the Sharks last season were the opposite, right? I mean, their away. I think their away record last season was better than their home record, but this season it's different. Playing on home ice seems to be a major boon for them. So I think even if it's not Vegas, I think you want home ice as long as you can keep it. So if you're first in the Pacific, or if you're lucky enough to be first in the Western, you hold home ice all the way through, right? I think I don't think it's necessary to get to the Cup again, but I think that's a huge help.
Made a hell of a lot easier. Yeah. And I think home ice, as you talked about it. Well, there's 2 important factors. Avoiding Vegas the first round. I mean, I think Vegas will beat Calgary in the first round if that ends up being the matchup. So I think we're going to have to go through Vegas at some point anyway, which maybe you would argue it's better to get them in the first round than the second round, but they're probably going to have to go through Vegas at some point anyway. I don't see Calgary beating Vegas or San Jose, frankly.
Well, that's the thing. I think if we get Vegas in the first round, we may have to face Calgary still. If we have Calgary in the
that's the advantage.
If Calgary and Vegas play, we only got to face one of them.
Yeah. But home ice in general is huge. I mean, the Sharks are 23-5-5 at home this year. Granted, the playoffs are a different animal, but they're obviously a much better home team. You can probably say that about most NHL teams, but especially this Sharks team, they seem to be pretty dominant at home. So if they can get home ice throughout the playoffs, not just for those, probably not throughout the playoffs if Tampa Bay gets to the Cup, because Tampa Bay is going to have the best record, but
right.
And Boston is likely going to finish ahead of the Sharks too. But at least home ice throughout the West would be critical if they get to the conference finals, which most likely would be against Winnipeg or Nashville. That would be huge. The last time they played Nashville in the playoffs, the year they went to the Cup, they played them in the second round, and the home team won every single game in that series. It went 7 games, and the home team won every single game. Nashville's probably one of the hardest buildings in the NHL to play in, aside from Vegas. Which if those two teams meet in the Western Conference Finals, I will be in Nashville, but I don't plan on going to watch the Sharks lose in Nashville because that's a very tough build team. But we'll see how that goes if that happens.
You better go represent.
I don't know, man. We'll see how the series goes if it happens, but one step at a time, right?
Steve says, "I can't believe we have to root for Vegas tonight." Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, last couple of nights they played Calgary earlier this week too, so. But we've got enough of a lead on Vegas to where I don't think we have to worry about them passing unless we fall flat on our face.
So I thought this question was good. You had this on Twitter, and we actually got a few, like 10 votes or something, although one of them was me. So I got. But if Sharks win the division, who's their toughest wild card matchup? And I'm going to guess we don't agree on this, but who's yours? So Blues, Stars, Wild, Avalanche, Coyotes are the possibilities, right?
I keep going back and forth between Dallas and Minnesota, mainly just for historical reasons, because the Sharks have struggled in both of those buildings, Dallas and Minnesota. Tomorrow's game against Minnesota may change my opinion on that. We'll see how that game goes. That'll be a good kind of possible first-round preview. But if I had to pick between those two, I'm going to go with Dallas. Just because they do have some star talent in Seguin and Ben, and those guys can always take over a series. And I'll just stress again, the Sharks have not historically been very good in Dallas. Dallas has had the Sharks number historically in the playoffs. Granted, these are decade-old playoff matchups, but I don't know, something about Dallas just makes me question a little bit what might happen in that series. Even though the Sharks clearly have a much better team on paper than any of the teams that we're talking about.
We actually agree then. So I think Dallas is the sleeper here. I think that they are much better than they look. I think that to some extent, whether it was planned or not, the comments from the owner CEO has kind of given them something to prove.
It definitely woke them up. I mean, it worked.
Yeah, I don't know if that was his intent. I actually was worried it would go the other way and backfire on him because it was kind of a ridiculous thing.
But for the short term here, it's helped out.
So I mean, St. Louis is clearly a good team, right? Last night or yesterday, they're a tough team to beat, but I think we can do it. I think Dallas is the one that is better than we think they are. And a lot of these teams, if it becomes a battle of goaltending, I mean,
that's a concern with Vegas, right? And Fleury. I mean, it's funny. I've debated with some Shark fans on certain message boards that have tried to tell me that Fleury and Jones are about equal, and I about died laughing. Fleury did not have a great regular season up until the last couple of weeks, but there's no doubt who you would trust more in the playoffs than Fleury or Jones. I mean, it's not even a question, right? So outside of Fleury, though, I mean, I don't think any of the other goalies in the West scare me that much. Hellebuyck in Winnipeg, I don't know if he won the Vezina Trophy last year or was nominated, but he doesn't scare me that much. Rinne is a very good goalie for Nashville, but historically in the playoffs he has been pretty bad. And he's kind of the reason they haven't won the Cup, despite having a very good team the last 2 years. So the only goalie that scares me in the playoffs as far as the West is concerned is Fleury.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Fleury's one of those where I'm amazed at what he's done with Vegas. Right? He was kind of not that he was always a good goalie, but when Vegas picked him up, there was a lot of like he's kind of losing it. He's going down, and then he's been just great. And I don't know if that's partially because everybody on that team felt like they had something to prove because they were the guys that their teams didn't protect. But I don't want to face him. Like I hope they get knocked out somehow. I hope it's them Calgary and Calgary beats them because I feel much more confident taking on Calgary.
Easiest path to the conference finals for sure.
Yeah.
If the Sharks faced a wild card team and then Calgary in the second round. Not that Calgary will be easy by any stretch. That's also a tough building, but definitely I think an easier out than Vegas would be for sure. Steve, I apologize if I'm having any audio issues. I live in apartments, so the walls are very thin, and whenever the appliances turn on, it makes a lot of noise as well. But hopefully it's better now. So the other question we had down here, we talked about Karlsson and his return to the playoffs, so we've covered that. So the two remaining questions, obviously the Sharks have been one of the best offensive teams in the NHL this year. They're second in goals in the league. Obviously things are going to tighten up going into the playoffs, so they're not going to produce at the same rate that they are now, but I guess the way to ask that question is, do the Sharks have enough offense to potentially make up for any deficiencies either defensively or in net? Can they win, with offense in the playoffs?
They can. They have enough offense to win the playoffs, but only if they play defense first. Does that make sense? Like they need to focus on making up for their deficiency, which seems to be defense. Whether you want to say it's the guys in front of the goalie or you want to say it's the goalie.
Both,
yeah, or a combination of both. They need to be defensive minded. I think you get to playoffs, you're not going to score 5 goals every game. You're going to score 2 to 3 goals in a game. And I think so they need to focus on keeping the puck out of their net and take the goals when they can get them, which I don't think they have any problem. It's not like they lost any of their goal scorers. If Karlsson's back, then you've got a lot of offense being generated from the line, right? That was gone before. So yes, I think they have enough offense to score and to go to the cup. But I think what they need to do is they can't count on shooting more goals to get them out of their deficiency. They need to focus on the deficiency.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have a lot of 5-4, 6-4 games in the playoffs. I mean, it's possible, especially this day in the NHL, but most playoff games are 3-2, 2-1, low-scoring games, so you're going to have to tighten up defensively. I will say, though, I mean, if you go back to the years that the Blackhawks won 3 Stanley Cups, one of those years they had Niemi on goal, which, I mean, granted, Niemi was much better now than he is now. I mean, God, the game against Montreal, he was fucking terrible. The first 2 goals he gave up to the Sharks were just embarrassing. But anyway, my point is that teams have won the cup with mediocre goaltending because their team was so dominant offensively and possession-wise, which I think this Sharks team is very similar to. So I don't think Jones has to be great. He just has to be average or good enough to not, allow a bad goal in every single game. I mean, they can even overcome an occasional bad goal, but he just has to be okay for them to advance. Obviously, if he plays better than that, then this team is even more dangerous than it is already.
Yeah, I guess I get what you're saying. Like kind of basically how the season's been, right? Where he's good enough to keep them in the game, and then the offense.
As long as he's not losing games by himself, then I think they can deal with it. So, John comments, honestly, don't think we can count on Ek for a long playoff run and what kind of stamina he would have. I totally agree, John. We talked about that a few minutes ago, that I personally don't think he's going to make it through the playoffs without some sort of injury. He'll probably try to keep playing through it, but I don't think they can count on Karlsson to be the Karlsson that we saw, 2 months ago where he was dominating with Dylan.
I do think it depends on draw, though, too, right? Like who we end up playing. I mean, if it's someone where Karlsson can get his feet for a series as opposed to having to play all out for a series, then maybe he warms up into a deeper run.
I mean, it's the playoffs, though, right? I mean, every game is sort of pretty brutal, but hopefully. I mean, I think the bigger point there, right, is if they can get through the first round quickly, I don't think they're going to sweep the first round, but get through it in 5 games as opposed to a long 6 or 7 game series, which again goes back to avoiding Vegas. Then that gives him an extra week, probably between the first and second round, to rest up a little bit more. So,
well, and just the series, I think that's a good point for the series as a whole. How deep does Carlson go? How longer is each series? I mean, if we're talking 4 or 5 games each series, I think he's got a lot more chance of making it through. If you're talking 7 games every series, which honestly, looking at last playoffs, wouldn't be weird to see every series go 7 games. I think then you're in trouble.
When you look at the teams that typically win the Cup, they usually get through the first round and sometimes even the second round pretty quickly. The more long series you play, the much more difficult it is to win the Cup. I mean, injuries rack up. The guys are just exhausted. And a lot of times how you do in the first round determines how you do the rest of the playoffs in terms of rest. The sooner you finish that first round, the better off you are. People will argue rest first rest, but historically it's been proven you are much better off to put away your first 2 opponents as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, with how, Sharks already have trouble with how physical some of the other teams are. Yeah. You compound that with it being playoff hockey and playing the same team multiple nights. They're going to be beat up, and they're going to need that extra rest time for sure.
Well, it's funny. You look at their roster; they have a lot of big guys, but they're not an overly physical team, right? I mean,
right.
Thornton, Burns, Meyer, Hurdle, Kane. Those are all very big guys and big bodies, but outside of Meyer and Kane and Dillon, those are really the 3 guys that play physical on the team.
Yeah.
So they're a big team, which maybe they can handle a more physical team as a result, but they're not typically a team that's going to physically impose their will on the other team and grind them down.
That's a good question. James Hines, is Burns MVP this year?
I'm assuming he just means Sharks MVP and not NHL MVP.
If you mean Sharks MVP, I say no.
Yeah.
I say Tomas Hertl.
Yeah, you and I both agree with that one.
Yeah. Now, does he win the Norris Trophy? Yes, I think. I don't think anyone's close to him really at this point.
Well, I think part of the challenge with the whole Sharks MVP discussion is Burns is you're kind of getting what you're expecting, and that's I think sort of undermines his performance because he's been so good for so long. You just kind of assume he's going to keep being dominant, which he has been. This is probably his best year with the Sharks. Whereas Hertl, I mean, he's always had a ton of talent, but he's never put it together like he has this year. So he gets much more notoriety because it wasn't expected per se. It was a bigger surprise.
I think the question of MVP, though, sometimes is who made the difference this year in your team, right? And so if Burns is like this every season, I mean, Hertl's tied with Pavelski and Couture for number of points. Yeah. It's a 3-way tie for the second most points on the team. And I don't think anyone thought Hertl would be there. And he turned around Kane's season. I mean, Kane wasn't playing anything.
Start to the season too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I think if you're talking Sharks MVP, I think it's Hertl because of his ability to step up and fill need
and
this
make
season.
Other players better.
Yeah, and make other players better for sure.
And at Hertl, I mean, I've just been so blown away by him this year. I mean, it's funny. They went into this offseason, trying to get a number 1 center in John Tavares. And I'm not going to say Hertl's a number 1 center yet. I would say he's not a 1A center. He's more of a 1B center. I think he's passed up Couture as our best center. But Doug Wilson may have found his number 1 center without having to go outside the organization at this point. I mean, I could see Hertl and Couture being their top 2 centers for the next, 5, 6, 7 years. So let's see. We had a few other questions. Kane, are we close to his return? I don't know. We'll see. Originally it seemed like he was close to coming back, and now it seems like he's had some sort of unexplained setback. I think that one's really going to be day to day, and we won't really know until game time. So we'll see what happens with that.
60 assists for Burns. Yeah, actually, so I will say it's one thing about Burns' game that's a little different, right? Is he doesn't have that many goals. He's got 13 goals, and I think he had more in previous seasons.
His Norris Trophy year, I think he scored 26, I want to say.
Yeah.
But his goal production since that Norris year has gone down quite a bit. I think it's because teams have focused in so hard on him, right? I mean, the Norris Trophy year was really his breakout year. And he sort of, NHL discovered Brent Burns. He was always a good player until then, but not, superstar type figure. In teams, especially before we had Carlson, I mean, Burns was the only threat the Sharks had on the back end.
Right.
So as soon as he gets the puck, they watch the points very closely because they know the Sharks just cycle it back to the blue line so Burns can fire away. And I think that's limited his goals the last couple of years, just how much opponents focus on him.
I was going to say two things. One was that, I think that he plays much more. He and Carlson are playing a very similar game now, right? Like, you're shooting from the blue line. You are putting it towards the net, but honestly, you're expecting someone to tip it. And I think Burns has to make more of those off-net, almost pass shots, because guys have been jumping in front of his puck, which amazes me because I would never jump in front of that puck. But I'd be interested to see. I don't have time to look up the stats, but I'd be interested to see how many shots he's had blocked this year in comparison to previous years or the last 2 years since he won his Norris. Like, I think, like you said, they know he's a problem. You always see them send someone up to get in front of him.
Yeah.
Every team does it. Whereas if it's Hertl, or if it's Vlasic, or then they kind of just let him sit there and take a shot.
Against most teams, I mean, the defense will kind of swarm the net and protect the front of the net. That's the most valuable part of the ice. But against the Sharks, teams watch the blue line much closer because that's the Sharks' offensive system, is feed it back to the point and rely on Burns and Carlson to make hay. The other thing that we've talked about with Burns over the years before this podcast is that the last couple of years especially, you kind of talked about a little bit, he shoots for tips more often than he shoots for goals, which drives you and I nuts. When Pavelski is out there, okay, fine, shoot for a tip every fucking time. Makes sense. And we have a few other good tippers. Meyer's gotten very good. He's taken after Pavelski a little bit with that. But if he actually shot to score instead of shooting for tips, I guarantee he would be around 20 goals right now.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's funny because I think Carlson does the same thing, and I think it's because he had such a bad stretch at the beginning of the season that he just lost confidence in shooting.
Yeah.
I would like to see Burns and Carlson, and I don't know who does it for the Vlasic line, but I'd like to see Burns and Carlson, like you said, shoot more for an actual goal. And here's the thing: with Pavs, you don't need to shoot for the tip. He's going to tip it, whether you're shooting for it or not, right?
Yeah.
Like, if that puck's in the air, he's going to get a stick on it. I mean,
sure, it helps. It gives him a better chance. But you're right. I mean, if you're shooting on net, he's going to try to get a stick on it anyway. So, some of the deflection goals he's had this year are ridiculous. He had a couple from his knees, and the guy's just got a knack for it. He practices it for hours at a time with Burns in particular. But
he's good at stealing goals. That's what I always say.
I always feel bad for defensemen with that. I mean, all the goals they lose from, well, especially the ones I really feel bad are the ones that go on off like a guy's shoulder or his knee pad, or his skate, like they did absolutely nothing to cause that goal. But
some of Jumbo's goals this year that have been it bounced off Jumbo. Yay, he's having a great season.
Carlson's had quite a few this year where they went in off bodies and other people. So,
and then real quick, the last question we had on our agenda here was, can Martin Jones flip the switch into playoff mode? We talked about this a little bit. I think he's tried, already. I see the switch flip for a good.
He'll have a good few games and then he reverts back, right?
Or even a period, right? He'll have. Yeah. He's had some amazing first periods lately where you watch him in the first period and you're like, it should be 2 goals by now, but he's been stopping them. And like we said before, he keeps the Sharks in it, right? But then once the Sharks start scoring, he kind of, I don't know if he loses focus or it's not as big of a deal. He kind of just loses that focus and it goes in the top shelf because everybody knows that's where you shoot.
I do think the Sharks in general are a difficult team to play as a goalie for because they allow the second or third fewest shots in the NHL. So you're not getting a lot of action, which goalies will always tell you they prefer more shots because it gets them into the game. And then the shots they do give up tend to be grade A opportunities, either 2-on-1s or breakaways. So it is a difficult job. I mean, that being said, he's got the worst save percentage of any starting goalie, I'm pretty sure. So not really much excuse. But in terms of the playoffs, I think it's highly optimistic, borderline delusional to think that he's suddenly going to turn into the Martin Jones of 2 years ago. I do think he can play better than he has this season, but I mean, he's not going to be the guy, I think, to steal a game or steal a series at this point. Like we talked about earlier, I think he just thinks he'll be good enough to not be a liability, and this team is strong enough to win with average goaltending.
Yeah, I think there were things he was better at previous seasons, like closing the side of the net. There's been a few that, like, how he's not up against the post, I don't know. Coming out and challenging shots when they're not, right in front of him.
Over aggressive, right? I mean, there's been so many times where the net's completely fucking empty because he's 10 feet out of the net, sliding across the ice.
Yeah. So, but I think he tightens it up a little bit. I think you do see that. I think he is a professional. He realizes, just like everybody else who's in the playoffs, that, okay, now's the time to really work on this and focus. I think you see it tighten up a little bit, but I agree. I think the biggest thing is not giving up those breakaways. I mean,
we got to help him out for sure.
Yeah.
If we play like we have during the regular season with that, then we're up a creek without a paddle. So we'll end on Steve's question.
That's what I was going to say.
Does Karlsson re-sign here? What is your call? So we talked about this a few episodes ago, but things have changed dramatically since then. At that time, Karlsson was playing his best hockey as a Shark. The team was rolling. It looked like he was a perfect fit. He had finally settled in. Things were groovy, right? I mean, everything was going well. And we both were very confident at that point Karlsson was coming back. Now the landscape has completely changed because of his injuries. And first of all, we don't know when he's going to come back. And then the bigger question is, when he does come back, how effective is he going to be? So I honestly don't feel like we can really give a accurate assessment of that until we see how he looks in the playoffs. I think the playoffs determines what happens. If he has injuries and he struggles to get through the playoffs, I have a hard time seeing Doug Wilson taking that risk moving forward, which would be a bitter pill to swallow, to lose a player that good for as much as they gave up to get him in terms of draft picks. But to me, it comes down to playoff performance. If they either win the cup or get deep in the playoffs and he's effective, then I think there's a high probability he comes back.
I'd say it's 50-50 at this point for me. I think you probably would agree with that. And it's going to be tipped one way or the other based on playoffs. I think the thing to remember is, because I know there's a lot of people who want Karlsson back, and I totally understand that. But I think the important thing to remember is we win without him. Yeah. And him not signing frees up a lot of money to sign everybody we currently have and to bring in some people maybe we need. I'm going to say, if I had to pick, I'm leaning no right now. Okay. It's like 49-51. Literally, I'm just, if I was to make a bet right now, I would bet no, we don't sign him.
Yeah, it pains me to say it because I'd have to burn this jersey. No, I'm not going to burn the jersey, but I would stop wearing it. But no, if I had to guess right now, I would say no as well, just because I don't think he's going to make it through the playoffs. And he's going to want full value, and I don't know if the Sharks are in a position with their cap issues to risk paying $11 million to someone who may not make it through a season.
And he's too smart. He's too smart for that. He knows what $11 million will do, right? And that if there's a question about Karlsson, that $11 million can be better spent. And I think that's why I lean no at this point. So
I hope we are wrong. I hope he comes back, makes it to the playoffs. Maybe he's the Conn Smythe winner, and the Sharks hold the cup. And
obviously, we win the cup, and Karlsson's a major part of that. I think he's re-signed.
Honestly, we win the cup. I don't give a fuck who's on the team next year, quite frankly. Just win the thing, and we'll figure out next year when next year comes, and I could care less until then.
You've only been waiting 25 years or something. I don't know why you're worried about it.
If we win the cup, you can trade Pavelski, Thornton, Vlasic. I don't care. Do whatever you want at that point.
Well, Jumbo retires if we win a cup. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah,
all right.
We haven't talked about that, but quick segue on that, or segment on that. I would agree that Jumbo, I think, comes back next year unless they win the cup. If they don't win the cup, then I think he returns. If they do win the cup, then I don't see him coming back.
Yeah. So. All right, well, this has been our 4th episode. We went a little over an hour, which is pretty good because I wasn't sure we had enough material, but we did. Thank you all for joining us. Check us out on Sports Talk 916 if you want to see some blog posts. I'm going to make Nolan write one here pretty soon. I just wrote one last week while we were waiting that long 3-day break. Also, you can follow us on @SharksTalk916 on Twitter. We tweet during the games usually, and occasionally even outside of that. And then check us out here theoretically every 2 weeks, although we'll have some updates on that
Yeah, stay tuned on our
coming
next
up.
show. With me moving, it's going to be hit and miss. So we'll have a show at some point, but we'll let you know when.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Go Sharks.